gentlemen, welcome to the Human Energy Field. Once again, as always, I'm your host Henry, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Jamie. This episode, I want to start off by issuing a brief apology for the lack of episode last month. Due to various scheduling conflicts, I lost my voice. It was just one of those things. We didn't manage to get an episode put together in time to stick to our schedule, but thank you for being here with us today. We had a lot of great questions on the Instagram, a lot of great questions. So I want to say thank you to everyone for sending in your queries. As always, we're kind of split for choice about what to pick and what to go for, which is probably the best problem to have. And in the end, Jamie, what sort of line of conversation are we going to be starting ourselves off on for this episode?
It is really tough, isn't it? And as you say, it's a good problem to have. We had loads of different suggestions about various games and topics and things like that. But I think a few of them stood out to us, and a few of them were actually repeated by different people. So people were asking us our kind of favourite games, and I think quite often, we like to spend some time talking about a specific game. And I thought it might be fun to do like a little, top 5 favorite games, and the way that you do that, top 5 favorite movies, top 5 favorite shows, albums, whatever. Nothing too set in stone, no order, but I just think it maybe will dredge up some games that we haven't talked about, or some games that we'd forgotten we enjoyed so much, and it'd be a good topic for discussion. And I think it'd be a really good thing that we could then take over to the Discord and then ask other people to kind of present their top 5s. And I think that would be a good community thing, because there's loads of good chat going on down there, and I think that could get some good conversation buzzing in the Discord as well. So I think maybe start it here and carry it over there.
Brilliant. I like it. I like your plan. Top 5, it's kind of deceptively difficult. I think, especially with something so complex like RPGs, you can say, top 5, that's easy. And then you actually try and start thinking about what it's going to be and realise that, hang on, this is not as easy as I thought it might have been. So, yeah, I'm sure there'll be some good conversation to come out of that on the Discord. So if you're not already part of our Human Energy Field Discord, please do get yourself down there. You can find the invite. I've tried to spread it around everywhere you listen to the podcast as well. So, for example, if you're not on Instagram, if you're listening to us on YouTube, if you're listening to us on Spotify, I've tried to put the invite to the Discord link in the bio there. So hopefully you can still access it and still find your way through to us, where you can reach both myself and Jamie directly in the Discord, as well as a host of other fine people from all over the world who are a part of what we're doing here, which is just really great. So again, guys, thank you all. I
actually had a really good chat on the Discord about an hour before we sat down to record, which is definitely going to be something I'm going to talk about maybe later in the episode or next episode, because I had some really good chats. But it was kind of a Warhammer related thing, so I think we'll save that towards the end.
Cool. Yep. As always, stay tuned till the end of the episode, where we'll chat a bit about whatever Warhammer stuff we've got going on. I also have a little bit of an announcement that I'd like to make. So do stay tuned. Towards the end of the episode, we'll talk a little bit about that. But for now, let's get started. Do you want to take it in turns? Do you want to just unleash your top 5 all at once, like an alpha strike? How do you want to do it?
Alpha strike, love it. I think the best thing to do with something like this is let's set our parameters. Let's define the structure of the game, so to speak. And I think what we're looking for to kind of codify it, maybe, because it's quite a wide question, isn't it? And it could mean all sorts. So let's just say top 5 RPGs in general. So we're just talking about a game, not a specific book or anything, just a game line. The core book, for instance. 5 that if you had to take one box of books to a new place, or be stranded on a desert island with only 5 books in your player group, which are the 5 books that you think you couldn't do without? Which are your top 5 favorite? And I think that any genre, new or old, that doesn't matter, and it doesn't have to be in order, but which 5 books would you take? And I think that's where we should go with it.
So you're assuming that each book in this 5 are going to have mechanics and a game engine, as opposed to being a kind of world book or source book or something. We're looking at core books, are we?
Well, I guess maybe that's your choice, but I was thinking core books, because unless you think a game is so good that you could take a source book instead of the core book, but then I'd like to discuss why you wouldn't take the core book. So yeah, fuck it, man, throw in source books too. That's fine.
All right, okay, we'll see where this goes then. Yeah. Okay. I'm just picturing that Led Zeppelin tune from Top of the Pops 2. That's been playing in the background. Yeah. Let me drop a bomb for the first one, because this is the easiest answer for me. Whenever someone says favorite setting or favorite RPG or favorite whatever, this is. Or I don't know the other four, but I know this one. Do you know what I mean? By a gentleman by the name of James Vale, a game called Zas Irkala.
Nice.
This game came out a few years ago. I'm just trying to check written the year in the front. 2018. This game came out, and James Vale, he was quite active on Instagram and promoting not only the core book Zas Irkala, and also the he did a bunch of like expansions for it, and he did like survivalist rules and stuff, which is cool. And I'll get into the game and the setting in a moment, but I don't know, he kind of dropped off the map a little bit, and I lament his disappearance, because he's a good designer and a good writer, and he just reading this book, he's got a lot of things to say, and he's just completely disappeared. So I don't know if anyone knows where James Vale has gone for the last few years. Come and let us know, because the world of RPGs is worse off without him in it, in my opinion.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Zas Irkala itself is, I mean, a quick way to describe it would be I guess it's a black metal role-playing game, I suppose. But I don't think even that really kind of that doesn't really kind of sum it up in itself. The setting is this kind of nightmarish, dimensional, psychic horror kind of plane, and the tone is very dark and sort of, I guess, black metal, I suppose, would be one way to describe it. But even with that, the recent rise to prominence of this kind of metal aesthetic in games, I'm thinking about things like Morkborg and its various offshoots, and all the kind of popular, that popularity of the punk / metal aesthetic, if you like. Whether or not it has anything to do with punk is another question, which we'll take back to the Discord where it belongs. But I think even in that crowd, which is now becoming quite a crowded little corner of our hobby, Zas Irkala still stands out to me, because it feels like a kind of one-man demo tape. It feels like this guy's put his soul into it. It's not some company who's trying to make a profit. The setting has all these weird quirks and strange characters. The character creation is a really good way to be introduced into the world, because there's one way to do it, is to roll dice, and that will kind of generate your character for you. But the settings that the characters come from is everything from Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, through to a fictional Dark Ages on whatever home planet your character's from, through to Industrial Era, through to Nuclear Era, and like you can play a character from an atomic civilization alongside another character who's from the Stone Age, and you've both been transported via whatever kind of twisted dimensional pathways into this like harrowing, unforgiving, merciless world of ash and bone. So it's got this real kind of multitudinous aspect to it that I really like. In terms of the setting, just flicking through the book and reading the magical items and reading the NPCs and the characters and stuff, really unique. And for the sake of this episode, I won't spend a lot of time getting into it now, maybe on a future episode, but it's just got this tone to it that is consistent throughout, which in itself is an achievement, because this book's quite big, quite dense, and it just does a really good job of building the world. And to follow on from that, the mechanics themselves correspond to the setting, which is, we're coming now on to answering some of the other questions we got in the Instagram, but I think the world is made because of the system that it comes with, and those two things are so inextricably linked with each other. Zas Irkala becomes an experience. You're not just kind of stealing the engine to go somewhere else, or even if you steal bits of the world to use in your own thing. It's a very singular experience, and using the mechanics, playing the game the way it's designed, gives you this sense that you're in this unforgiving world because of the stats you've got to manage. The two main stats in Zas Irkala are stress and doom, and they're big letters right in the top of your character sheet. So all the time you're playing, you have to manage these numbers, making sure that your doom doesn't get too high, keeping your stress in check, etc. So the mechanics tie in directly to the setting and the experiences of the player characters in that setting, And it's just a complete gaming experience for me. Zacic Card, I couldn't speak about it highly enough. It's honestly one of my all-time favourites, and I think it always will be. I'm a big fan of this game.
Do you know what? It's a solid choice. I picked it up when it first came out. I actually had the pleasure to play through the scenario in the book with the author and a few other guys online, obviously, when it came out, and it was such a blast. I confess to having not run it myself. But it's quite often one of those books I look to and go, I should run that sometime, because it really is very cool. And it's like an afterworld, isn't it? Like a kind of hellish kind of afterlife setting, really, isn't it? I mean, I think you're dead when you join the game, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's some influence with the kind of the gods and goddesses in it, kind of that whole Babylonian, Sumerian kind of influence, through the funnel of kind of black metal. So it's got it's got a real unique identity. Yeah,
it's a little bit Tombs of Nephron-Ka. It's a little bit Mesopotamian,
right.
like horror, I guess. It's just a really, really cool, unique little book.
That's a solid choice, man. It's good. Right, okay, we'll do tennis with this. We'll go backwards and forwards. So Zacic is in your list for number one. Solid. I'm gonna have to and see the bar has already been set high. So
oh yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I set it high for myself. Don't worry.
You've gone style here, right? And I'm gonna go functionality for my first choice. And I quite often say this to people when I'm talking about like top 5 RPGs. When White Wolf ended their old World of Darkness and created their new World of Darkness, which was the shift to Vampire Requiem and Werewolf the Forsaken, etc. They decided to have everything run off one core book, which was the World of Darkness, what I call the NWAD Blue Book, because it's a blue-covered book, and it's basically the core rules for the new World of Darkness. It's the system which then you bolt on either Vampire or Werewolf or Mage or whatever in order to get a complete game. But the NWAD Blue Book stands alone for me as probably one of the most functional, streamlined, modern horror/thriller RPGs that you could find on the market at any time. It's so you're able to take it and run, whether you want to do a kind of John Grisham style thing, or whether you want to do like a Ultraviolet type of game, or whether you want to go full hog and do like a Bram Stoker's Dracula, or anything you can imagine that's at least reasonably modern day, but then you can alter it so it's historical, but it's kind of designed for modern day. You could do Twin Peaks, you could do True Detective, you could imagine all of those things. This is the book where the mechanics allow you to do that. And because it's essentially a streamlined, updated version of the old Storyteller system, a combination of an ability and a tribute, you create a dice pool, hit a target number, it's dead easy. It's easy to teach people, it's easy to carry around and get a random game going. It's the kind of book that I would go to if I'd seen a cool movie and I went, this movie doesn't have an RPG, what am I going to use to run it? This book would be one of the ones that I fall back to.
Awesome. I remember the first time I ever touched this system, and it was a game that you were running at a Dungeon Punks event. I think it was the winter one they put on a few years ago. More than a few years ago now.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And that was the first time I played it, and I remember coming away from the table being like, man, what book was that? Let me get a copy of this. Like, I need this system in my life. I can see the versatility of it, even from spending like an hour and a half or 2 hours playing with the guys or whatever it was. I just came away from it seeing the possibilities of this particular system. It's so broad and diverse, but it still has enough in it to get that level of detail that you're looking for based on whatever tone you set.
Yeah,
it's a really good. It covers a lot of bases, doesn't it?
Yeah, you could do X-Files with it. You could do Buffy with it. You could do you know what I mean? Like that's the spectrum that it can go on. You can do any kind of modern day semi supernatural thing, and it'll cover you, like, because it's just so useful. And I think if for a lot of GMs who have like ideas bouncing around their heads, then this is a book you can go back to time after time and know that the system will kind of support that idea as long as you're thinking along that kind of modern thriller line. There's nothing better to it in terms of functionality. It's great.
Would you say it's your favourite game system?
I think the Storyteller game system in general probably is. There are elements to the New World of Darkness system that I find a little bit clunky. I think what they almost do a Pathfinder on it, where they kind of add a lot of extra stuff that I don't really feel is necessary, but it's just extra crunch. But that's so easy to ignore that extra crunch and just run the bare bones system that I don't find it intrusive. It's not like it's baked in, it's just added on. So yeah, I think I wouldn't necessarily run it every little optional rule in there as written. But then to defend the writers, I think maybe that's not the intention. I think they're giving you lots of options so that the book remains a one-stop shop, which I think is splendid, and I applaud that. But I think that the core system itself, the storyteller system, as presented in Vampire the Masquerade originally, I think is probably one of my favourite systems. But again, like you said, I don't want to go too much into mechanics because I think we have another question where we're just going to deep dive into game mechanics in general. So I'll kind of hold off on that.
Yeah, mechanics discussion is forthcoming in a lot more detail. If you want to hear our opinions on what makes a good game engine, or how do you get a good feel for what's a good system, and etc., because that was some really good questions along those lines. We're definitely going to be having that conversation, so stay tuned for that.
Balls back to you.
All right, okay. So the MWAD Blue Book that you've mentioned, I'll be honest, would be naturally in my top 5 as well. Coming off the back of that story I just told, where we played it for the first time, and just my experiences running it since then and playing in it since then. But for the sake of this, I'm going to scratch that out of my top 5 because it's already been said, and we want a bit of variety here on Hef. So instead, I'm going to choose Night's Black Agents.
Ooh.
I was thinking about this when I asked you if we could use core books or game engines, or what are the rules for this, because Night's Black Agents is I'd probably more on the system agnostic side of the spectrum as opposed to more mechanical and crunchy. It's more of a guide, isn't it, really, than an engine?
Yeah, go ahead and tell us what it is.
Night's Black Agents by Kenneth Haidt is essentially it's a book to run spy thrillers with vampires, more or less. So it advertises itself as along the same lines as things like the Bourne series of films, James Bond, I suppose more recently things like Tenet, kind of globe-trotting or hard-hitting spy action adventure with a bit of romance, a bit of drama, a bit of character development, and their own spin that they've put on it is that there's also a supernatural element to the game, usually in the form of antagonists. So the book is, I mean, it's a big book, and it kind of describes not only how to build a good spy story, and not only how to build a good horror story, but how to combine those two so that you're left with something that is a kind of strange and memorable experience. And one thing I really like about it in particular is that there's a big section on the vampires and how to include the monsters and how to bring them, how to like slowly drip feed your players the horror, and how to kind of build up the expectations or build up the mystery of what are these monsters that we're hunting, or however you choose to introduce them into your book. But there's no solid, in contrast to World of Darkness, where Vampire the Masquerade vampires are very specifically Vampire the Masquerade vampires. They have their own set of rules, they have their own lore about ghouls and embracing, and it's all very written down and strict. If you open up Night's Black Agents, it says the vampires could be aliens, they could be from hell, they could be demons, they could be your biblical kind of entities, they could be vampires in the truest sense, like the Bram Stoker style. It gives you so much freedom as to how and where you want to implement the monsters, if you like. It really kind of lets you set your own tone for the game. It just kind of guides you along. It has these different suggested kind of atmospheres to set for your game. Do you want it to be quick and fast and action packed, or do you want to do a slow burn and let things build over time, or somewhere in between? And how do you go about doing that properly from a kind of structural point of view? I think it's as a kind of guide to putting campaign worlds together or writing a story. It's almost kind of indispensable. It's almost indispensable to have alongside whatever else you're doing if you're thinking of running any sort of horror game or even an action game. Obviously you don't have to use everything that's in there, but it's a really well written and very densely packed tome of atmosphere and tropes and information, setting information that you may not have heard of. You want to run a spy flick, but you don't know enough about spycraft, then the book's got everything you need in there. Yeah. I'm particularly a big fan of spy stories and spycraft that took place in like the pre-internet age. Thinking about John le Carré, stuff like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and that kind of thing, where spycraft was practical and tangible, and it involved code words and obituaries and newspapers and signals and because there was no internet, it was a very kind of pragmatic style of being a spy, and what does that mean physically, and I think you can get a lot out of that in a game. And Night's Black Agents does a really good job of kind of leading you through the different areas and types of not only action flick but horror flicks too, and how to combine those into a good game. So it's as a guide, it's a great time. It's invaluable, and it's one that I enjoy reading.
I also love Night's Black Agents. I just want to add a couple of things there, if I may. The first one is
please,
that for anybody listening, the system is the Gumshoe system. That's the one it uses, which was first introduced in Robin D. Law's Esoterrorists game and Fear Itself, and it's also the system that works for Trail of Cthulhu. It's at its heart an investigative system, which meshes perfectly with obviously everything you've just said. So the system itself, the Gumshoe system, it really suits that. And the second thing is, I loved what you said about how the vampires can be all sorts of different things, and it's one thing I wanted to add if you hadn't said it. So, some people like to pair fine wine with a meal and stuff like that, you know what I mean? Like white wine with fish, okay, and, red wine with steak or whatever. And, I would like to pair some literature with Night's Black Agents to get the best effect. And I'm going to highlight a group of short stories by one of my favourite writers, Brian Lumley. And he wrote a collection of vampire short stories called A Coven of Vampires. And it's a set of short stories, and in each story he basically assumes a very different reality for whatever the vampires happen to be, whether it's an alien vampire or a damned soul, or do you know what I mean, like whatever, or super psychic vampire, whatever it happens to be. And I think if you read through the stories in A Coven of Vampires, each short story could be the jumping off point for a campaign that used Night's Black Agents as its game book, and I think those two would mesh perfectly.
Brilliant.
And I don't advocate eating meat or fish, by the way, but I just thought the analogy was there.
Yeah. So. In theory, it's a good analogy, but not in practice, maybe. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, Coven of Vampires by Brian Lumley added to that. But yeah, I also love Night's Black Agents. I think it's a fantastic game.
Now I'm thirsty for red wine now. I mean the Gumshoe system. It's the book's kind of built around that, but you could very easily take 90% of the book without ever touching the Gumshoe system. It depends how you want to use it, I think, but there's so much in there. It doesn't confine you to run it with that game engine. I mean, not to speak bad of the Gumshoe system, because it's very diverse in itself, and it has quite a lot of good. It has some pros to it. The Gumshoe can be good for a lot of different types of games, but I think Night's Black Agents is probably broader than the system that it's using as a vehicle. I think this is my opinion, of course, but I think it presents more subject matter than maybe Gumshoe. Then maybe I would want to use Gumshoe for. You know what I mean? It's broader than the engine that it gives itself. So that's probably to the book's credit rather than the system's discredit, if that makes sense. Not to speak ill of either of them, but it's just to say that it's a really good book more than anything else. So that's my number 2, coming off the back of your New World of Darkness choice. That's mine. Okay,
so I think we're gonna pick an old favourite for my number 2 spot. It's a game that's very dear to my heart. It's been around a long time. I can assume everybody will have heard of it. Call of Cthulhu. It was one of the very first RPGs that I played after D&D and Cyberpunk and stuff. My personal favourite edition is the 5th edition. Call of Cthulhu is one of those games where the editions actually haven't really changed much throughout the years, just in terms of aesthetics and being a bit cleaner. I think the biggest difference to the game was with the most recent edition, which is the 7th edition, which I've flicked through. But I mean, I have so much Call of Cthulhu 5th edition material. It's not that I dislike the new version, it's just I don't need it. I just don't need more Call of Cthulhu rules or different rules in my life. So whichever edition of Call of Cthulhu you have, obviously, as everybody knows, it's based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. And what I love about it is, being a big fan of the literature, it's the perfect vehicle to tell those kind of stories. I think the Chaosium's BRP, or basic role-playing system, is excellent. You know, it's one of the finest percentile systems out there. It's very robust. It's very easy to use. And I think particularly the core book for 5th edition conjures exactly the right atmosphere that I want for telling Call of Cthulhu stories. It allows you to play in three time eras. You know, allows you to play in the 1890s or the 1920s, which is the default setting, or in what they call Cthulhu Now, which at the time was the 90s. So I think for me, there's enough in there. There's all of the beasties and Cthulhu entities that you want. There's, you know, all the spells and occult tomes, but there's a nice little system in there. So for me, Call of Cthulhu 5th edition has to be in that list, I think.
Is it any more or less expensive than 4th or 6th edition? Is it particularly rare to get hold of?
Not in my personal experience, no. When it comes to Call of Cthulhu, there are certain out-of-print books for older editions that can fetch a high secondary market price. Off the top of my head, we're talking about things like Beyond the Mountains of Madness and Horror on the Orient Express, which actually, you know, either have been or are being reprinted by you know, the company now, right. So people will be able to get their hands on this stuff. I don't know if it's, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think they're pretty faithful reprints that won't necessarily affect the value of your original secondary markets, because to have the original of those is still quite expensive. So, for instance, even though Horror on the Orient Express got reprinted, the original still goes for 3 figures. You know, it's very, very hard to get one of those in any decent condition for a small fee. So I think it will be the same for things like Beyond the Mountains of Madness and any of the other classic long campaigns. But no, 5th edition or 4th edition or 3rd edition, they'll all cost you pretty much, the core books will cost you the same on the secondary market value. I think if you shop around at the minute, you can get one, you know, for 25 quid, $35, you know, I think is a reasonable price to pay for any of the core books. Interestingly, I think it was 4th edition, 3rd or 4th edition, and GW, and obviously GW had the license to print a lot of different role-playing games in the UK, so there are Games Workshop versions, but then 5th edition, it's completely back to Chaosium. So not that it makes much difference, but there's some really cool GW artwork in the older versions. But the fifth edition book for me, I think it's a nostalgia thing as well. It was the first edition that I got, and I've just kind of stuck with it. And I think the source books are great. All of the Arkham Country source books go along with it. But the core book itself, I think, is spot on, and you can get a lot of play out of it.
Awesome. I like the sound of a retro crossover between old GW stuff and Lovecraft mythos. That sounds pretty cool. If I was going to run if I was going to pick up Call of Cthulhu, is the book versatile enough that I can take bits from it to use in other types of games? I understand that Lovecraftian horror is a very kind of specific brand of horror and doesn't really lend itself too well outside of its own bubble, which of course it does excellently. But in terms of versatility and utility, what use can I get out of this book outside of just your kind of standard Lovecraft story? Is there enough in there for me to take over to any other kind of horror or action game?
Okay, so I mean, I've got to preface this with any creative GM can squeeze stuff out of any book. So what I'm about to say, if you disagree with me, that's fine. But it's about how much work is necessary, and we're maybe going to talk about the average GM, if such a thing exists. I would say that what Call of Cthulhu does, it does very well, but it's very narrow focus.
Right.
I would not agree that you could really take that and apply it to many other things. Okay. I think the Call of Cthulhu mythos has been spread thin over all sorts of licenses and media over the last kind of 20 to 30 years. So I mean, it's hard to avoid Cuddly Cthulhus and Cthulhu Slippers and Cthulhu-inspired TV shows and, you know, Cthulhu-inspired kids books and all of that nonsense. But so I think we understand what the mythos is. So anyone can put mythos stuff into their games, even if they don't quite realize they're putting mythos stuff into their games. But I think it would be hard to take anything from the Call of Cthulhu core book and apply it to anything else without it just becoming Cthulhu, you know, because that is what it is. It is unashamedly a vehicle to allow us to explore the world set down in those short stories, and it does that very well, but it because of that, its remit is very narrow and not particularly wide.
Right, specifically a Lovecraftian type thing then.
I would say so, but what it does very well.
Okay, all right. That's something we'll have to get into we'll have to maybe do a deep dive on Call of Cthulhu one episode, because I imagine with so many editions and stuff, there's hours of chat to be had there.
Yeah, we could go through the different editions all the way from, first edition box set Call of Cthulhu in the 80s all the way up. Yeah, we could do that.
So, guys, if that's something you're interested in, let us know. Get in touch. humanenergyfieldpodcast@gmail.com. Join the Discord. Okay, so that was what was that, your number 2 or number 3?
That was my number 2, so it's up to your number 3.
Okay. I'm going to go with the Cypher system.
Ooh.
Yeah, I'm going to pick Cypher.
New kid on the block.
The relatively new kid on the block, Monty Cook's, probably maybe my favourite thing that Monty Cook's done, and I'm including Planescape in that statement. I've not yet opened Tolus, but I can't imagine that it would really float my boat in the way that Cypher does. But I chose the Cypher system because as a kind of quote unquote story based gamer, as a narrative GM, or at least attempting to be a narrative GM, shall we say, story is the most important to me, and I like a game that has mechanics that coincide with the story and boost the story along and don't get in the way and kind of put the story first. And by design, that's what Cypher is from the ground up. It's a story-based game engine that is designed to put the story first and to disappear into the background when it's not needed, and to not get in the way and to not be crunchy, and to allow the story that you're telling to take the forefront and stay there. And I am maybe about 2/3 of the way through a campaign using the Cypher system at the moment, and it's a saving grace compared to some other games I've played, stuff like Apocalypse World, which is probably in the bottom of my bottom 5 games. You know, when you play the game where the mechanics get in the way of the story, and then you come over to something like Cypher System, which is designed to put the story first, it's such a breath of fresh air. Especially as a GM who does a lot of improv, I tend to write a certain percentage of any given session and then improv a certain percentage of any given session. I'm not giving away my secrets here, so that's all you're going to get. But the Cypher system does really well at filling in those blanks and just giving you the few tools that you need in order to really confidently be able to run any type of story in any setting, you know?
Can you give us a really brief synopsis of what the mechanics are like, the basic mechanics?
Everything in the Cypher system has one number, which is a difficulty rating, from 1 to 10. And that number corresponds to a number that you have to hit on a D20 roll. The difficulty number that you set for any given obstacle or challenge, it's up to the players to use their modifiers to bring that number down. So you're trying to roll over the number. Maybe it's 3 or more, 6 or more, something like that. If the challenge rating is quite high, then the players, with their modifiers, with whatever skills they have, whatever assets that are at their disposal, if they want to apply extra effort, with a capital E, to that roll, then they're able to do so in certain circumstances as well. And if they have a particular edge in a particular type of interaction, they can also apply that. Each one of those steps brings the difficulty of the challenge down a level in order to make it easier for them to hit that target and to roll over that target. So all the players are concerned about is bringing their one challenge number down for any given thing. So all of the things on the character sheet mechanically are designed around the amount of points you have and the amount of points in your pools for your stats to spend on bringing these challenge numbers down in order to succeed at that challenge. So you could set something really difficult, or you think you're setting something really difficult. Maybe it's doing some really daring, heroic move, like jumping from one moving horse to another or something like that, which under normal circumstances might be quite impossible. And then before you know it, your player has gone, you know what, I'm going to decide to spend a lot of my points on this particular move because I want to make sure I can pull it off. And they bring the difficulty level down by 3 or 4 numbers, and before you know it, it's right down near the bottom of the chart, and they're able to completely ace that roll. So it puts a lot of the agency into the hands of the players in order to say, you get to kind of decide where you're going to apply your effort, what roles are more important to you than others, and how are you going to spend your points to kind of move the game in the directions you want it to go.
Yeah,
it puts a lot of power into the players' hands, which I really like, and it's the GM is hands-off dice, which is how I play anyway.
It's just what I was going to mention.
Right. Okay then. Yeah. I mean, I as best as I can when I'm running any game, unless maybe the system specifically calls for it, but I try and keep my hands off the dice and just have the players roll, for example, attack and defense, or the players roll anything that is any kind of challenge, that should be something that the players have some degree of either luck or control over, and that's baked into the Cypher system, and I think that works really well. The GM, as the powers that I get as a GM, if you like, apart from obviously being in control of the story, you get to have intrusions, so I can trade my players' XP for a story beat. So I can say, look, this isn't going the way I wanted it to go. I mean, I'm thinking, not saying this out loud to the players, but I can say in my head, this isn't going how I want it to go. If I GM intrude here for my players, just push the game a little bit towards where I had in mind, or I've got a cool set piece and the players aren't activating it, but I'd like to bring it in because it would fit perfectly here right now. You can say to your players, if you take a certain amount of XP, I would like to intrude on this scenario and usually make it worse. I'll be honest. Usually add to the tension or add to the drama. And if they choose to accept it, which of course you would, they're given XP as a reward, which they can spend on upgrading their characters. So it's when even the mechanics are based around how to improve the story, and any mechanic that you are using or utilizing in the game or putting into effect usually has a direct impact on the story that you're telling or the direction of the story. So as a storytelling system, it's suited me fine. It's really kind of served me quite well.
It's so interesting to have a game where all of the dice rolls are in the player's hands, and it reminds me of reading some very old gaming magazines, going back to the kind of genesis of D&D, and reading about some groups and games where all of the dice rolls is in the GM's hands and the players never roll anything, and it's so weird.
Well, I can't imagine what that would be like playing that. Well, it's like a conversation, just watching someone else roll dice.
Yeah, there's so many weird things in original D&D. It's like, you also used to have this thing. I know I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but I'll keep it brief. You used to have a party caller. So basically, there was one leader in the party, and they would all like discuss things. And only the party leader would be able to talk to the GM and tell them what the party was going to do. And none of the other characters would speak to the GM or even was allowed to speak unless the party leader was doing it. It's just such a bizarre concept. But I guess these were the original foundations of the RPG hobby on there. So, and we've grown wildly beyond them now. But it's so interesting to see the pendulum swing entirely in the other direction.
That's true. Yeah. That's a good point. Actually, I couldn't see this game existing 15 years ago or something. It's quite a kind of, well, as far as I know, it's quite a progressively minded bit of writing.
I think Monty Cook is to be applauded because Cypher System's been around a little while. It's in its second edition now, and I think when it first came out, hidden in amongst a game called Numenera, I thought it was a real breath of fresh air, and I think it ushered in a kind of mini golden age of kind of what I'll call independent RPGs. I know it's not necessarily technically correct to call anything Monty Cook does independent, but what I mean is that it wasn't Dungeons and Dragons, it wasn't Shadowrun, it wasn't Cyberpunk. To have a brand new game come out and a brand new game company to speak, I thought Numenera really shook what was happening at the time when I remember it coming out, and obviously the Cypher system was then extrapolated out from Numenera and given to be a generic system. So yeah, I think you have to give a lot of credit for Monty Cook for developing Cypher system when he did. He's certainly shown himself to be ahead of the curve when it comes to that style of game design, without a doubt.
Yes, yeah, and it's my style down to a T. And I would have maybe chosen Numenera because I do like that setting, but specifically the Cypher system is my choice because of it's you can do absolutely anything with it and it'll work. So my number 3 is the Cypher rulebook 2nd edition.
Another excellent choice.
Thank you very much. Over to you, my friend.
Thanks. I'm gonna go a bit of a weird one, a bit of a maybe I'm saying this and I'm going to say it's an unknown game and loads of people going, I've heard of that. But as far as I was concerned, it's a bit of a lesser known game. And it's an aquatic sci-fi game called Blue Planet. It was originally published by a company called Biohazard Games. That's the version that I keep in my personal collection. It's great for collectors because there's only 2 books in the series, but we're specifically talking about the core book. It was later taken on and into a 2nd edition by the guys at Fantasy Flight, I believe, and then a lot more source books were out for it, and so that it's much more common to find the Fantasy Flight version of Blue Planet. But I specifically like the original because it had its own system. it was big, very dense book, very high concept, did what it did very well. So the overall idea behind Blue Planet is, mankind is taken to the stars and whatever, and has found a planet that is essentially water world, for want of a better analogy. Obviously covered in water, and it has its own kind of aquatic living beings and stuff, but mankind has colonized it. So it ends up having this kind of alien outland kind of sci-fi colony feel, and it's got all those kind of that Blade Runner-esque level of technology, but then it's set on this really bizarre environment, which is water. So then you get all of this ideas like, aquatic cyber tech, which is not something you kind of think of when you think cyberpunk. And there are other games that have challenged this and done this over time, but I think Blue Planet is just this wonderful mix of genres. It's kind of like DSV meets Blade Runner. It's just like it's really cool. It's really different, and that's what I like about it. But it doesn't pull any punches when it comes to the flora and fauna and society and civilization, and it treats it. It's very scientific. It's very kind of grounded. So it's very low and gritty cyberpunk sci-fi, but it's got this kind of semi-fantastical background to it, and it's things that maybe on paper you think wouldn't work, but then when you get them together, it's a success in my opinion. And not a lot of people have heard of Blue Planet.
How old is it?
Oh, you're testing me now. I think the original Blue Planet's probably going to be very early 2000s. I think late 90s, 2000s. Very, very late 90s maybe. 97, 98, something like that. I remember the Fantasy Flight one kicking about in the early 2000s, so yeah, it'll be before that. But there were only 2 books for the original Biohazard version, which was the core book, and one called Archipelago, which was a thin source book, which was a bit of a gazetteer to some of the islands on the planet, of which there weren't many. Obviously, most of it's covered by water. But.
Right, awesome. What's the game engine like?
It's specific, so it's got its own game engine.
Yeah.
It's quite crunchy, but it's, without going too much into it again, without going back into mechanics, it's one of these things where the mechanics have been designed to suit the game. Love it. And it part of the feel is that very scientific, very grounded feel is represented in the game engine. There's a lot of charts and facts and figures, and it's not a forgiving game engine, I must admit. It's not one, if you enter into it looking for a rules-like game, that is not what you're going to find. But I think that's also common with a lot of games from that kind of 90s time period, where people would create a system for their own game, and it could be quite complicated and quite like with a hard learning curve. It's not unusual to find that in a lot of games, because rules-like engines just weren't the thing. They weren't, I mean, I'm not saying they didn't exist, but they weren't the norm back then, kind of like they are now. And so it's quite a complicated system, but it suits its purpose. But again, like anything, if you really enjoyed the setting, you could then pick up your Cypher rulebook and run it with Cypher, or or the NWAD rulebook, or anything else that we've mentioned. You could use to run Blue Planet if you didn't have the time, energy, or intelligence to master the system within. So I know I'm being cheeky there. I was enjoying it.
Okay, I like that a lot. What's the art style like? I'm trying to picture this book in my head, but I have no visual reference for it. What does it look like?
Well, I'll start this with saying art's for babies, but
of course, yeah,
of course, yeah. But do you know what? There isn't a huge amount of art in it. The art that is inside is black and white, quite simple, and actually it's a really big, dense book with kind of small font, and which I really love because I'm getting a lot of content. And I think if the art isn't amazing, I don't want it splashed throughout the book. So there are scant images. The images that are in there are fine. It's not the best art, but it isn't the worst either. I've seen a lot worse. But art's thin on the ground through the book, so it can look quite a challenging game. If you picked it off the shelf and flicked through it, you'd be like, there's a telephone directory full of small font and a few images. But I think sometimes the effort versus reward ratio, if you want to get stuck into that, and you could argue the other way, that new modern game designers have managed to get across theme and tone in a much more kind of aesthetically pleasing way and maybe that's a skill in itself. I think that at some point that becomes just an opinion and a stylistic kind of choice. But for me, I think there's a lot of content there, and I think they realised that they didn't want to take up too much paid space with illustrations when they didn't have like a top-notch illustrator, but the stuff that's there is fit for purpose. But there's not a lot of it really.
That rings true with me definitely, because you want to have. I mean, you're kind of paying for the content, and you're paying for the words, aren't you? Really, that's where the game is.
Well, I mean, traditionally, but things are changing, aren't they? But
true, very very true. Things are changing, but in terms of value for money, you know, or at least the amount of time and hours you get out of this game, you want as much kind of writing in there as possible, really, and obviously art is just kind of because they ran out of space, and there's nothing really valuable in art as itself, obviously, as we all know, and art isn't really for anyone over the age of about 12. You know, it's pretty like, and the best kind of games are the ones that have no art in them at all, or even the hard.
Absolutely.
I mean, just even the covers is really, they should just be unformatted bits of card that hold together the pages of words. Really, there should be no cover art for anything. I don't think.
I mean, that's the goal.
That's the goal, isn't it? Yeah, to just have an unformatted script of text without any grammar or punctuation in it, and to just have words.
None at all. Yeah, I think you should just I mean, if you want to put the effort in, that's what you get in it. But people are just lazy nowadays.
Does it make people lazy? They just draw things like lazy babies.
Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
Yeah, shocking. People just want to play Troika. It's awful. Jogging, Troika's fine.
Segue into my number 4. Yeah. No, you know what, man? Troika's in my list, but I actually want to pick for my number 4. Similar to your probably less well-known obscure science fiction, I would like to nominate for my number 4 a game called Hack the Planet, which is a cyberpunk Forged in the Dark game.
Right.
So it's Forged in the Dark, whatever you have to think about the system, we'll come on to that in a second. It's written by a guy called Fraser Simons, published by a company called SJK. Fraser Simons, I know, has done a lot of other stuff that I can't think off the top of my head right now, but he's quite a prolific games writer. Maybe you've heard of him. I'm sure he tends to do mostly kind of science fiction stuff. Hack the Planet is particularly appealing to me because it's a very good bit of cli-fi or climate fiction. It envisages a dystopian world which is ravaged by natural disasters, all kinds of natural disasters, earthquakes, tornadoes, rising sea levels, dust storms, and static storms and stuff. And it's kind of a mega city, and you're playing like various types of criminals or ne'er-do-wells in this like authoritarian mega city. And there is value to be found in these extreme weather events. You know, you can gather data from them, or maybe they leave behind things of value as they pass, or they open up new places, new ways to travel through the city that weren't there before, whatever it might be. So I really like how the game uses these weather events. And they are events when they occur. You know, it's not like a bit of rain in the British Midlands. These are real extreme weather events. And I like how the game uses those as part of its kind of integral to the system. So it's a Forged in the Dark game, which is a kind of heist-based system. I'm sure a lot of people are quite familiar with that system. Forged in the Dark has a relationship with Powered by the Apocalypse, which earlier on in the episode I mentioned was at the bottom of my list. So this is a conflicting one for me, because the system itself is something that I don't particularly gel with, as well as something like Cypher. But I'm a big fan of climate fiction, and I just love the idea that these what does he call them? He calls them acts of God, these weather events in the book. So in the book's lore, they're called acts of God. You know, which in itself carries a whole load of connotations that you could explore if you wanted to, just by itself. But I love the idea of that kind of interaction between advanced human civilization, advanced human technology, with all its kind of trappings and with all its kind of benefits, and then the natural world kind of, as it tends to do, telling the human race that they are insignificant and just coming along and sweeping things off and carrying things away and destroying things and leaving behind piles of wreckage. And then you're playing these kind of, I guess in a way they're like parasites. Your little player characters, just tiny people in this huge city who are just doing their best to get by based off whatever opportunities arise from these weather events. It's a great little kind of, it's a great setting. I love the way the weather's included in it, and I love the different character classes in it, and the kind of pacing of Forged in the Dark works well for me. They have the heist and the downtime and that kind of thing. So it's a good for one shots, and it's good for shorter sessions.
Do you know what? I love that because one of the many reasons I love doing this with you. I like to consider myself that I keep abreast of RPGs and know about them and stuff like that. And it's getting harder and harder these days because there's so much coming out on so many different levels. Kickstarter, indie, like everything. You can't keep up with everything. Yeah. I've never heard of that, and that sounds pretty cool. I'm going to check that out.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick up a copy and I'm gonna order one of those and look through it. It sounds cool. Good.
Yeah, it's great. It is worth a look through. I think it's, out of the books that I've seen Fraser Simons do, this is the one that's appealed to me the most. I'm actually, this has just come back to me now, but I actually backed this book on Kickstarter. I completely forgot about that. It must have been years and years ago.
Right, sweet.
The art style is this weird kind of, it's kind of half digital photos and half like, in some places it looks like the artist has taken tiny bits of bitmaps from other images all over Google and then kind of squashed them together and made figures out of them and made scenes out of them and stuff. And in some places it looks really realistic and kind of there's a realism to it, but in some places it's this kind of vectorized, like high res, like digital art style. It's a very strange images to flick through, but because of I'm assuming how the artist put together the images and how he's composed them, there's some really great scenes. There's try and picture something like Kowloon Walled City or the real kind of slums of an area, and then in the foreground he's got like a bunch of plants and big floral green bushes and pink blossoms, and then some like cyberpunk dressed people on motorbikes picking through the flowers for whatever reason. So it's just cool. It's a really cool, like strange art style to match this setting that I haven't seen in many other places. And obviously you've got the whole kind of megacorps that you're railing against, as with any good cyberpunk dystopian fiction. You're playing the underdog, railing against the corporations. That's the only way to do it. But so it takes the tropes that we know and love, and it kind of updates them a little bit, and it adds in extreme weather, which is lovely and dramatic and makes for great set pieces, and it's just a well put together setting.
Awesome.
Number 4 for me. So what's your number 4?
Do you know what? There's a lot of cyberpunk getting into this list, and there's going to be one more here with my fourth choice. I've got to go for another classic. It's a game that most people will have heard of, Shadowrun. A game that is very dear to me. I've played a lot of Shadowrun. Now, I'm going to specifically say Shadowrun 2nd Edition. I think a lot of new gamers or people new to the hobby or whatever will be aware of Shadowrun. It's still around and has been around a long time. I believe it's in its 6th or 7th incarnation. 6th, I believe. I don't care much for the new ones. We could get into a whole deep dive on Shadowrun, which maybe are these things what we should do, because actually we did have on Instagram a few people requesting deep dives into particular game lines. So I think maybe if we highlight Call of Cthulhu for one, I think Shadowrun could be another full episode, because it's been published for the best part of 30 years, and it's had a lot of different source books and a lot of style changes and how it's kept up with modern technology, because Shadowrun was obviously created in the kind of late 80s, when our idea of cyberpunk was fresh out of William Gibson and that kind of stuff, and Blade Runner and George Effinger and stuff. But Shadowrun turns everything on its head, as everybody knows, combining fantasy with cyberpunk. So we have all of those basic cyberpunk tropes, the mega corporations that you've just mentioned, and the kind of brutal urban cities and everything. But then we had orcs and dwarves and dragons and magic and shamans and corporate wage mages and all this kind of stuff, and then combine it with elven deckers, and do you know what I mean? Like, so it was just it was a marriage made in heaven. It was something that hadn't really been done before on a big scale. Farsa made a big crash with Shadowrun. Cyberpunk was already very popular, but they managed to kind of turn it into something else. And I think second edition, it's the game system is fairly easy. It's fairly easy to get into. It's not very complicated, which would be my main issue with the more recent versions of Shadowrun. I mean, for me, it started going downhill about kind of fourth edition-ish. It's kind of changed hands through different companies over the years, but to me, there was great support for second edition Shadowrun. It kind of worked out its little few kinks that it had in first edition, which is often the case with many games. The second edition tends to be the finest edition before it loses any of its unique identity, but after they've had a chance to kind of iron out any initial flaws, of which in first edition Shadowrun there aren't many, to be fair. But so second edition Shadowrun, which is I think the default setting is still Seattle, but definitely kind of Northwest America or Northern America in general is the area covered by the book, and obviously takes place in a world set around 2050, 2070, that kind of time, when a lot of the population have changed into demi-humans and magic is back and all of those amazing things that never make a deal with the dragon. If people haven't played tabletop RPGs, I'm sure they've seen Shadowrun computer games or comics or novels or whatever, and for anyone who's watched Netflix, Bright with Will Smith is essentially watching Shadowrun. So I think no list would be complete without mentioning what I think is one of the cornerstones of kind of second wave modern gaming, which is Shadowrun.
Yeah, I was expecting it to be brought up at some point. I think as an outsider, which I was, and I suppose still am to some degree, to Shadowrun, it's very easy to look at what they're doing and think it's kind of goofy. Adding in magical races and things into what is already quite a densely packed fictional setting. Any cyberpunk can be as rich and dense as you need it to be without magical additions. From a outsider's standpoint, when I first heard about what Shadowrun was, I thought it kind of sounded a little bit goofy, but as I read and experienced it, they actually pull it off, and it actually works well, and it doesn't seem overwrought or shoehorned. It seems like it's a kind of natural fit.
They've managed to develop their own really solid internal consistency with what's happening, but I think you do make up a valid point that Shadowrun, at its essence, you can't really take it mega seriously. You can't make it a really dark urban game like you could with Cyberpunk or World of Darkness, because it has dwarves flying helicopters and dragons in boardrooms and all that kind of stuff, and no matter how you try and spin that, it is going to be a bit lighter in tone, unfortunately. And everyone's game will be different, and I'm sure people can play some really serious Shadowrun games, but I think at its heart it is a bit like fantasy, sci-fi D&D. I mean, that's kind of what it is, and I think it's not really an accusation to level at the game. I think it's just an understanding that that's what it is, and I think if you approach the Shadowrun table, you are approaching it a little bit more fast and loose, and I think you don't have to take it necessarily too seriously. I don't think it takes itself too seriously. I think it never falls into parody. Well, not the early ones don't necessarily, but I think you're right in what you say, that there is that. Goofy is a strong word, but it is that kind of cartoony element, that kind of little more kind of lightheartedness to it, just because of what it is. But that's not to detract from it. It's a very popular game. That a lot of people have a love for it. I certainly do, and played a lot of Shadowrun. It's, in terms of hours spent at the table, Shadowrun might be up there with the top 3 games that I've spent the most hours playing in my life. That's because it's so easy to play and so easy to get people into.
Right, so if I'm thinking in terms of like time periods now, like eras of gaming, if I was going to pick some kind of retro cyberpunk game from the era of Shadowrun 2E, I should pick that over Cyberpunk, the game. I mean, capital C for those listening. Cyberpunk, the game. I mean, what's the kind of mechanical advantages to Shadowrun over Cyberpunk? Less story and setting, more mechanical.
They're totally different mechanics. Cyberpunk is I don't think there's a mechanical advantage over either of them. I don't think I would put one of the mechanics over the other. They're both solid mechanic sets that lasted a long time and supported two very good game lines. So I think looking at it mechanically, I could imagine playing Shadowrun with the Cyberpunk system, and I could also imagine playing Cyberpunk with the Shadowrun system. I don't think either of them are necessarily better than the other one,
right,
or not necessarily entwined with their settings. This was back when every game had its own engine. They weren't just borrowing engines, and everything just wasn't powered by some stupid apocalypse. Like, if you were a game designer, you made the effort to create a system, and Foster created one, and like I say, they ironed out the kinks with it, and it was a good system. But our Talsorian did the same with Cyberpunk. His was a gritty Friday night firefight system, which was what it was originally, and then it was kind of developed into Cyberpunk. So it just made sense because stylistically, our Talsorian and Mike Pondsmith wanted, especially gunfire combat, to be very deadly, and it is in Cyberpunk. It's very deadly, whereas Shadowrun has a more heroic D&D feel to it. Which is quite fitted to its setting, so it's a little bit more survivable. Not massively so, it's still quite a deadly firefight system, but especially when people have got a lot of cyberware and a lot of advantages and stuff like that, but you can also get good armor, and there's good healing, and any world where the mage can heal you, and as well as a trauma team is your advantages are getting a lot better. But mechanically I don't have an issue with either of those, so I wouldn't see the advantage in comparing them mechanically, I don't think.
Right, so it's just a case of tone and taste.
Yeah, it's just a case that there were two games, and back then two games had two systems. That was it. There was very little sharing of systems. That wasn't really done. If you brought out a new game, you had to have a system.
Right.
This is pre-open gaming license. This is pre any of this. Do you know what I mean? Pre-rules light. You kind of had to make up a system if you wanted to release a game.
Fascinating. What's your favourite Shadowrun character to play?
Ooh, tough one. Probably. It's a very tough one because there's such a wide remit. But I'm gonna say Street Samurai,
cool,
which is the kind of Shadowrun version of the Cyberpunk solo. It's just cool. You can get some cool guns and some cool kit, and you can go a lot of different stylistic ways with it. I think with a lot of Cyberpunk games, playing a Decker or a Netrunner, it is fraught with problems for the rest of the group. Even though I like Shadowrun's magic system, I'm not really bothered about being a magician in that game, if you know what I mean. I have played some mages before, and I think shamans are quite cool because you can pick like a totem animal, and you can get a very different vibe with that. But I think if you want to play with the cool guns and the cool kit, then Street Samurai is the way to go. Plus, also Street Samurai just sounds cool, doesn't it? So.
It sounds cool as hell. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to doing a Shadowrun deep dive episode, because we've got to give that an hour or two of chat.
Yeah, we can go through all of the how the world is and what the different source books were covered and the progression of the game throughout the different editions, because it has been a long serving game that has gone through several game companies and several editions. So yeah, it's well worth looking into.
Brilliant. So Bordy, if you're listening, we'll get you on for that one, mate.
Yeah, yes, without a doubt. We'll have Mark Shadowrun Boardman on there for the Shadowrun chat, without a doubt. Brilliant.
Yeah, it belongs on my shelf as well. There's an empty Shadowrun shaped hole on my shelf that I need filled with Shadowrun. So
we're nearing the end of this list. So come on, then balls back to you for final choices.
Oh, okay. Number 5. In the Name of Suffering. Nah. So it's a toss up, man, and I've got an honourable mention that I'm going to get to, which will be 5.5. But for my 5th choice, I'm having a bit of a difficulty choosing between two. You know what I think I'm going to do? Okay, so my 5th choice, I made my decision. Vornheim.
Ooh.
Right. I mean...
Contentious.
And this conversation's not about to get contentious. So...
Shame.
Yeah, sorry, but that's not why we're doing this. This isn't top 5 biggest controversies on the internet. This isn't top 5 edgelords. This isn't anything like that. We're not going to be praising anyone or admonishing anyone. We're not here to do that. Make up your own mind about that stuff. We, of course, have our own opinions, but this isn't the place for mine. But Vornheim, and by extension, Frostbitten and Mutilated, under the banner of Lamentations of the Flame Princess, had a impact on me as a GM. And I can't, there's no real way to deny the kind of influence that specifically Vornheim had. Vornheim is a city book, I suppose, would be a way to say it. There's no game engines in there, but there is a lot of setting knowledge. There's a lot of setting information. There's a lot of generators for things and random tables, and there's a lot of utility in the book. And I always come back to this every time, but this is something that really makes a book for me, is what's the actual use I can get out of it. And Vornheim was the first book that became a kind of staple of my fantasy games, or maybe not even fantasy games, but it became a staple for any type of game I was running. I'd go around to a friend's house, or I'd be having players over, or I've been invited to run a game somewhere. Whatever it was, Vornheim's going in my bag every time. Sit at my table, prepare my things. I'm thinking back to pre-COVID now. I'm getting nostalgic and teary-eyed, but if I've got music, set the music on. If I've got a backdrop or whatever I'm doing, set it all up. Vornheim's on the table by my hand every time. And if I need to do anything in-game, or if I want to give players any kind of choice about, I don't know, who they're talking to, or what they're seeing, or when you loot the corpse, what's in there, or anything, go to Vornheim. Vornheim is quite, it has quite a specific tone to it. It does have this kind of dark and twisted feel to the city that it presents, and all the locations in the city it presents, and the NPCs that you can kind of generate with the book and that kind of thing. So even if you're running a game that doesn't match the tone of the book, I found that it still has a lot of use, because it's a kind of powerful generator for things. It talks about how to generate a quick map for a city. So if your players are going down back alleys, and if you've got one of these games that is taking place in a dense, packed kind of city or suburb or some sort of metropolis, the book instructs you basically to cast some dice onto its pages, and the fall and position of the dice generate your alleys, generate your map for you. So it's not like you're just reading words and then doing work in your head, and then that output is a map. You actually have the book kind of empowers you as a GM to use the tools that you have, which of course you've got a lot of dice around, you're a GM. It empowers you to use those to kind of generate stuff on the fly in a lot of different ways, whether it's just rolling on a table and picking number 64 down here, number 72, that makes that and that, or whether it's casting die and the actual fall and the location of the fall of the die in create something or whatever it might be. It's just, so without actually having a game engine, you still get a lot of use out of it for whatever you're using, and that's something that became very quickly very dear to my heart and very kind of influential to the way I like to approach games and the way I like to run things. So I mean, opinions on the author aside, it's an influential book for me personally, but I don't necessarily agree with the surroundings of it.
Okay, interesting. I think Vornheim was instrumental and a real champion for the random table wave that followed it. I think it was definitely a very fresh type of gaming book when it came out. It was very different. It didn't look or feel or act or behave like any other gaming book that was really around at the time. And I think it deserves credit for that, design-wise. I think Vornheim really made a splash, didn't it, when it came out? I think, it was very different. And I can totally agree with its, in terms of utility, it's a very useful book, and it's, there's no denying that, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's to this day, something that I look for in most new books that I buy is when I'm flicking through the pages and trying to get a feel for it, is how much actual practical use can I get out of this book on a regular or semi-regular basis, and how much am I going to put my finger on it and pull it down off the shelf, Do
you know what? Yeah. I think that's a valid way to look at a lot of books when we are we're given a lot of the agony of choice, which is great to have so much choice now in this kind of hobby. But our choice is a lot wider than a lot of our free time, or free money and things like that. So having to make those choices, one of the things which is fair to be a yardstick is how much use am I going to get out of this?
Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that I'm not guilty of maybe occasionally getting a book that I don't plan on playing, but I like to have on the shelf. As I'm sure we all do.
Yeah.
If something's nice to look at, it's nice to look at. But as a barometer for what's good, use is up there, and I'll get a lot of use out of Vornheim. And if I was going to run a fantasy game, I would still now maybe go for it and see if there's anything in there that I haven't yet completely plundered. So yeah, Vornheim, and by extension, if you're interested in Vornheim, I would also recommend checking out Frostbitten and Mutilated, which is kind of in the same vein, but is a bit more kind of snowy wastes and Valkyries and very kind of female-centric survival horror, I suppose would be a way to put it. But that's a quite cool book as well. And again,
yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, not mentioning anything specific, but that's worth checking out, I think. And it might be, I mean, you never know. I don't know how Lamentations of the Flame Princess is doing recently, but I kind of feel like it's dying a slow and painful death. So these might be relics of what will soon be an old time. Do you know what I mean? What will soon be a kind of forgotten period.
I think, as you've said, here's not the time and place to talk about a few different things, but and I don't want to do a massive sideways thing into Lamentations, but I've always said this. I think you've got to give James Raggi and Lamentations of the Flame Princess credit where credit's due, because I do not think we would be in the environment or the place we're at, RPG-wise and design-wise, if it wasn't for the work and the idea that he put his head above the castle walls doing Lamentations of the Flame Princess. And I would say a lot of OSR, I always use the term post-Lamentations because I think it was a real solid signpost in the RPG design kind of world when that came out, brave enough to kind of take that and push that forward. And it's a little bit style over substance, but then it doesn't need to tie itself down or whatever it is. And we could talk about Lamentations and kind of how it changed from its original offerings to like what it then became and what it means and what it did mean both to the designers and to the kind of RPG community at large. But I think you have to credit it with the work that it did and the ground that it cleared for other writers and designers to come in and follow it in the same vein.
Definitely, it did change up the scene a little bit, didn't it?
Massively. I think it irreversibly changed it, and I think we wouldn't. You can argue till the cows come home and the sun comes up about would we have Morkborg and stuff like that if it wasn't for Lamentations, and I would vehemently agree that we wouldn't. I'm not saying somebody wouldn't have come along and done something. Someone's got to be the first, but I think some people don't realize how long Lamentations was kind of banging at the door of RPGs before everybody let it in.
Yeah.
So and there's a lot of other creators and designers who kind of allied or assigned or became kind of partisans of that Lamentations of the Flame Princess movement. And there's some great little things out there, whether it's Fire on the Velvet Horizon or
Bluebeard's Pride,
or just weird little Lamentations connected books that don't necessarily have the Lamentations stamp on them, that only exist because Lamentations exists. And I mean maybe Vornheim, would Vornheim exist if it wasn't for Lamentations? Probably not.
No, certainly not. Yeah, certainly not.
So, I mean, was he going to do that for D&D, or did Lamentations provided this platform, this kind of art house, grindhouse, approach to stuff, which I think kind of taught people that the rules could be changed. And, as I said, it's not like it inevitably wasn't going to happen, but you have to give credit where credit's due, I think. And I think Lamentations massively changed the RPG landscape.
It's a strange subject to broach, obviously, because of the kind of problematic writers who are responsible for a lot of the stuff that we're enjoying. But it's the same as, I don't know, it's a difficult one, but you can listen to a certain type of music and enjoy an album without the artist's toxic views getting in the way of the way the music makes you feel. And I to some degree that's the same with RPGs. I mean, it depends on specific circumstances. This isn't going to be a conversation about that, but I would advise people who are interested in Vornheim, in Frostbitten and Mutilated, in the a range that Lamentations has to offer, which is a very broad range of books. A few of which are sitting on my shelf, and they're enjoyable to flick through. But I would advise readers to separate the writer's views from the books and just kind of take the products as they are, and not really place too much faith in who wrote them.
That bodes well for my frog being my last choice, right?
Please no. Please no, mate. I'll take back everything I said, please.
All right, so round this off, and I'll get the option number 5. I'm going to do a classic, but maybe it's a classic that I think it's kind of disappeared a little bit now. A lot of the gamers who've been around a long time will know of it, and I'm going to give a little bit of historical background for it. It's Ars Magica, and Ars Magica specifically 3rd edition Ars Magica by White Wolf. So basically, Ars Magica is a game where you play mages of great power. In the default setting is kind of 12th century mythic Europe. A few of the things that are really interesting to me about Ars Magica is it introduced a few concepts and was a champion of a few different things that I think have moved forward and have massively affected the way that I think about games, the way that I run games, the way that I read games and stuff like that. So Ars Magica, published by White Wolf in its 3rd edition, it was originally published by a company called Lion Rampart. So Mark Reinhagen of Vampire fame obviously was the kind of first designer on Ars Magica, and then when he got together with, the boys at White Wolf, it was published in its 3rd edition by White Wolf. Ars Magica has at its core a magic system, which is, in my opinion, the finest magic system that's ever been published in an RPG. And I realise that's quite a bold statement, but it is the precursor to the magic system that found its way into Mage: The Ascension by White Wolf, which is essentially a modern version of Ars Magica. Just exactly it is. It's also set in the same world, and that comes to my next point, which Ars Magica is unashamedly set in the world of darkness, but in the 12th century. This is well before anyone had even thought of Vampire the Dark Ages or anything like that. You have what's referred to as the Tremere incident, which is a group of mortal magi of House Tremere wanted immortality so much that they found a sleeping vampire and turned themselves into a clan, and they are now the clan Tremere that exist in Vampire the Masquerade. So there are these undeniable ties between these two licenses, which have been removed as the games moved on and went over to different hands. After the 3rd edition, it went over to Atlas Games, and they kind of played down this whole thing, and then it became its own kind of medieval mage game. But apart from its amazing magic system, apart from it shedding some light onto the ancient version of the world of darkness, it also was a great champion for something called troop play. Now, a lot of people will know what troop play is, and a lot of people have different ideas of what troop play is now that the RPG community is going in some wild and wonderful directions. But the idea that you can play several characters, and you will bring one of those characters of your choice, your roster of characters, along to a specific adventure. And Ars Magica was really good in the fact that you would create almost like a character pyramid. You would create your mage at the top of the pyramid, who was very powerful. Magic was great, and you could do lots of amazing things with it. Then underneath, you would have companions, which are basically equivalent of your standard D&D characters, whether you have an archer or a knight or something like that. And then below them, you have what's called grogs, which are kind of servants, shield grogs, cooks, bakers, all these kind of lower class characters that are kind of dispensable. You can grow to love them, but they can change over time. It was originally intended that maybe grogs just formed this kind of layer that you could just borrow from. Characters could just borrow each other's grogs, whereas companions were considered your kind of major player characters, and then mages. So that if there was 3 or 4 characters sitting around 3 or 4 players, sitting around a table, they might begin the session talking as their mages, and then deciding which mage is going to go on an adventure and which companions are going to go with them, so that every player can take a character from their roster, and you could take turns. So I will take my mage out on this adventure, and you would take your knight, and then next time I would take my archer, and blah, blah, blah. And we would all live in the same, covenant or, wizard's tower, and you could build up that as its own separate character and move it through seasons of success and decline and all that kind of stuff. So had some really interesting role-playing kind of concepts in terms of how to run a campaign or a chronicle, and how to share world-building duties and player character duties and stuff like that. And it's it's an almost flawless game in its presentation. The system is elegant. The magic system is fantastic. The setting is well realized. It doesn't fall into this horrible problem that a lot of the White Wolf boys did of trying to describe another place that wasn't modern day America or Canada and getting it wrong. Which they fixed over time, but there's a lot of the early books are just really, really bad. Whereas Ars Magica it's not pretending to be historically accurate 12th century Europe, but it's well presented. You get an idea of the culture and the times and the fuel system and the law and all this kind of stuff, and the mages kind of live outside of this. And there's a lot of source books done for it, but the book itself is a big, mighty tome. It looks like a spell book in itself. There's a lot. It turned the idea of the wizards on its head, because a lot of gamers at the time were coming from this Vancian D&D idea of magic, where you only have so many spell points and you forget a spell and then whatever. One of the big taglines for Ars Magica when it came out is like, to a mage, each spell is like a child. It knows it inside out. It can never forget it. So it's like you have this power, you understand. And it also split magic down into like different elements. So it was about how well you control this element, whether it be fire or animals or all this kind of stuff. And it's how you combine these kind of spheres of control in order to creatively come up with a spell that you needed at the time. But it took magic very seriously in that 12th century way. It wasn't flashbang magic. It was very ritualistic. It took time, but it was very powerful. So it's got a lot going for it. But anyone who's really interested in playing a heavy game of mages in a kind of 12th century Europe, Ars Magica is the game to go to, and 3rd edition is the edition to go for.
Amazing. Sounds so cool, that troop play idea. Just what a kind of groundbreaking idea for the time. Yeah,
it was really good. It just allowed you, and you ended up with a big cast of characters. I played some great Ars Magica games where grogs that you kind of create as a throwaway character, almost a red shirt, to use a kind of Star Trek lexicon, and end up being like really lovable or important kind of supporting characters in your campaign, and it really supports that kind of idea.
Awesome. I'm a big fan of any game that tries to take something we're familiar with and turn it on its head. The idea of like the weakling wizard who will get killed in the first combat and has to hide behind the barbarian for the whole time is turned around to become the absolute powerful focus of a whole campaign. I really like that idea. Anything like that twists tropes around, regardless of the fact that they did it so well, is very appealing to me. You want to see familiar things done in a different way.
Yeah. So there endeth our top fives. And do you know what? If you asked us next week, we might have another top five. You know what I mean? But don't worry, we're not going to subject you to that. But I mean, I'm sure as we go away, we'll think, oh, dang it, I've remembered another one. And I think that's, not to keep plugging the Discord, but that's where I think I'll be on the Discord saying, this is the one I forgot. This is one I forgot. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, not definitive five by any stretch of the imagination. Definitely. It will certainly change over time, but at least it's a kind of feel for our tastes, I suppose. Yeah. Do you have any honourable mentions for a 6th place?
I think very quickly I would have to mention Middle-earth role-playing by Iron Crown Enterprises from the 80s, which was the Tolkien-esque. The only reason I didn't put it in my top 5 is I think the core book alone doesn't provide the best gaming experience, but I think as a game line it was very, very good, and it's my favourite incarnation of Tolkien's Middle-earth in role-playing form. But the core book, I'm not entirely certain I couldn't just run Lord of the Rings with D&D or something and it'd be just as good. But the source books make the game what it is for me, but the core book alone isn't the finest example of a core book, if I'm honest.
Right, okay. I was planning on mentioning Mage the Ascension, so I'm glad you mentioned Ars Magica. There you go. And Troika as well, just because we mentioned it earlier. So if people are interested in Troika, check that one out as well, because that's a really good little kind of post-OSR system.
Yeah, it's kind of post-FNF system, really, isn't it? It's post-Fighting Fantasy. So.
Yes. Yeah. But that's good. That's worth checking out as well. I mean, what was that? One Instagram question, and that's an episode. So, guys, send in your questions, because we love having that interaction with you. And if it's something you want to hear about, we'll squeeze out as much time out of a question as possible. This has been enlightening for the both of us, which are always the best episodes when we both learn things live on air. I really like that. So, thank you for your questions, guys, on the Instagram. Do keep an eye out in the stories for any more polls we're going to be posting up with any further kind of opportunities to get involved. As well, on the Discord, of course, the conversation will continue, so please do come and join us over there, where I'm sure we'll have top 6 to 10. Yeah. I'm already picturing a lot of the conversations that this will spark.
I'm going to go on the Discord, and so I'm not going to do this on air, but on the Discord I'll do my worst 5 without a doubt. So expect that. Expect me on the Discord slagging off 5 games that I think are terrible. So that'll be contentious.
All right. Okay. Brilliant. Tell us about this Warhammer 2nd Edition conversation that you were having on the Discord, because that seems like a good example of the kind of interactions that people can expect to witness or take part in.
Yeah, it came out of I must admit I can't remember on one of the episodes I must have I referred to Warhammer 40,000 2nd Edition as childish, which is fine, and I kind of stand by that, but somebody on the...
It does have art in it.
Yeah, well, that's it, yeah. And quite rightly and quite nicely, one of our Discord members, shout out, Shattered Shields, came on and went, you called, I've listened to this episode, you called 40k 2nd Edition childish. What do you mean? And it's great, because it's a good opportunity for me to expand on something which, you can say a comment in the middle of something and not really get around to it. We had a really good chat, and it was great. And, the good thing was about it is we could banter backwards and forwards. And, as it transpired, 2nd Edition was kind of where he started. He's got a lot of nostalgia for it. And I said, nostalgia is a very powerful thing. And obviously, I'm old enough to have played through all the different editions. And I think what we came around to was really interesting. And I think maybe this is a subject for another time, is I was calling it childish, but it was designed to be the target demographic was then children. I think Games Workshop was at a period where Rogue Trader was really taking off. It was becoming very popular. Younger players were getting into it, but were finding maybe the rules and whatever a little bit inaccessible. And it knew it needed to capitalize on that younger demographic. So it created 2nd Edition, dumbed down the rules, put a cardboard Orc Dreadnought in the box and monopose Goth Boys and whatever, which was fine because they managed to bring the entry price down a little bit and bring the understanding down a little bit. So I think to defend that comment, it is a childish game, but it's not a childish game. It's the most childish version of 40k, which, it was only out of whatever. But it was intended to be that, it was designed for that. The colours were a lot more flashy. The books were a lot easier to read. It came as a boxed game for the first time, 2 players, which was a very kind of, Hero Quest Milton Bradley thing to do back then, was to bring out a starter box for 2, buy your kid for Christmas or a birthday and 2 kids get in and play it and put it back away in the box and put it back on the shelf, which was, how to get kids into that kind of war game. So we chatted backwards and forwards, which was great, and about how 40k spawned Necromunda and Gorgamorka, both of which we absolutely love, and ended up saying, it's not that I'm saying 2nd Edition is shit. It's not. It's got a lot to accredit it to. The creation of Necromunda, even though technically, if we get into it, it's not, because Confrontation, which was the precursor to Necromunda, actually came out of the White Dwarf in Rogue Trader era. So, for Warhammer historians, that's an entirely different chat. But the first mainstream edition of Necromunda came out of the 2nd Edition rules, as did Gorgamorka, and then he quite rightly pointed out that you've got Shadow War Armageddon, which was a kind of precursor, like a tester version for how people were going to react to Kill Team. And I really like Shadow War, and he really likes Shadow War, and it is kind of an updated, modern version of kind of Necromunda 2nd Edition 40k, but with better graphics and a bit more grown up, So it was nice to end up finding that middle ground, and, we both love Shadow War, and, blah, 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 and being able to kind of lay a bit more insight into the comment that I'd made. And I think we've always said this, if there's something you either do agree with or don't agree with, please hit us up on the email at humanenergyfieldpodcast@gmail.com, or, hit us up on the Discord, because it's great, because it'll spark more conversation, and that's good. And now, he has done a post about Shadow War on his Instagram, so I could go and find him on Instagram and follow him, and I'm sure I'm going to have a chat there about it as well. And it just creates that extra network. So it was I love doing that, and that's why I love being on the Discord. And it was just because we were literally having that chat just as I was about to set myself up to record. I said to him, I'm going to mention this because, it's a great chat, and it's a great great idea to kind of get people on and get people talking about stuff, and it made me think about a lot of wider stuff, about aesthetics and marketing and games being aimed at younger audiences, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It puts adults off, does it not? There's a lot of interesting topics there about that, but 40k second edition, childish. So
yeah, there is a lot to be said, and it's a conversation that you could take in a million directions, which are, as I'm sure listeners know, our favourite type of conversation to have here on Human Energy Field. But it's a kind of a question of degrees. Like you could be a third edition fanboy and look at second edition and go, well, that's really childish. But then anyone else looking outside could look at Warhammer third edition and say, well, that's also quite childish. So it's all about subjectivity, isn't it? Like true. Star Wars is kind of for kids. A lot of the science fiction that we like is kind of aimed at children, but we all kind of either aware of that and completely happy to accept it as it is and to love it for what it is, or we were kids when it came out, and as you said, nostalgia is a powerful thing, and it's still that inner child inside you that is you want to keep your inner child happy, don't you? And to do that, you have to tug on its heartstrings with things like, for in this case, Warhammer Second Edition, or whatever it was that you as a child enjoyed. You will still follow that through now to your adulthood, and you could be 30, 40, 50 years old, and your inner child will never age, and it still needs that little itch to be scratched from whatever it was that formed, whatever it was that formed it initially.
Yeah, and I think also that this was not what was happening at this conversation, because actually this guy in the Discord was really great and came at me with a genuine question. We had a good chat, but I've also had other interactions, not on the Discord, in kind of previous to even setting up the podcast, online and Instagram, where people can get really upset when you tell them the thing that they love isn't very good. And it's like, look, I'm not taking away your enjoyment of it, and it's cool that you like it. I'm just kind of pointing out why I think it's just not very good, like kind of objectively not very good. And I've always found that, especially in the gaming community, I think people can be very almost brainwashed or kind of fanatic about defending the thing that they like, and if you don't like it, that's a personal attack on them. And I just think, there's no time for that. Just don't worry about it. I'm not attacking your love of this thing. I'm just expressing an opinion that I'm not as in love with it as you are, and that's okay.
It's not a direct assault on the ego.
No, it's definitely not the case, and that still happens with kind of modern games and stuff, and that. And do you know when else I noticed that? This is a really weird thing. It's slight tangent, but it's connected. When the Dune trailers first started coming out for the movie, I wasn't a big fan, and but I was very vocal in saying, I haven't watched the movie, so I'm gonna withhold my opinion. But I don't really. I think
we've spoken about that briefly.
I don't like the look of it. It doesn't massively appeal to me, and everyone pretty much responded to me going, "What? It's brilliant. You're an idiot. How can you possibly think that?" And it's like, it's just my opinion, dude. I don't have to like it. And I'm like, am I talking to people who helped make it? That's the kind of response that I felt I was getting. And I was like, well, you know what do you have invested in this that you literally hate me saying it's not very good?
Or did Timothy Chalamet slide into your DMs and start trolling
unreal.
you?
And do you know what? Everybody, I've stopped speaking to people about Harry Potter because people can't take it. That's a separate thing. That people can't accept that I don't like Harry Potter and that it's not very good. And I'm like, but they're like, but he's just sold millions of. I don't care how much he's sold. People voted for Trump. Popular things don't have to be good. That's not the issue that I'm getting at here. I'm getting at the fact that Harry Potter as whatever, as an idea, as fiction, as whatever, isn't very good in my opinion. People get really upset about that.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's no accounting for taste, is there really? But I think it depends on your, like everything else. It depends on the context you're coming at it from. If you're someone who's spent decades exploring various fantasy worlds, and then a really badly written fantasy world rises to prominence, well, you've seen 20 that are better than this, so of course it doesn't mean anything to you. Whereas someone who's their first introduction to the world of magic or whatever is Harry Potter, and they've never experienced anything like that before, it's gonna seem to them completely groundbreaking and the best thing they've ever read, So I think context is really important in those kind of things.
It's the power of nostalgia and how they attach it to their personality and their identity as well, I think is massively important.
Yeah, the identity attachment thing, that can get a little bit intense. Just let people like what they like, you know what I mean?
But that's it. I don't have an issue with people liking it. It's quite quite frankly, it's the other way around. They're upset that I don't like it. And it's like,
yeah.
I'm okay with you liking it. Why can't you be okay that I don't like it? You know, it's okay that you think it's good. I'll sit and listen to you tell me why it's good. That's fine. You know, and I've read the books and I've watched the movies, but I don't find it good, and that's okay. I don't want to take anyone's joy away from it. You know, I'm not that way inclined. I'm not upset that other people like it. Just I find it lacking, but then people, and that should be fine, but then it's not fine. That it's like, no, you must like it, and it's like, well, I don't think that's how this works.
You know what definitely made Harry Potter better was J.K. Rowling retroactively adding a bunch of different, various, diverse types of people into the book that weren't in there when she wrote it. That just made it better.
Right? What?
Nothing. I'm just being dry. Never mind.
Yeah. I prefer actually that. Is it the Harry Potter with guns? One's replaced with guns. If you find that on YouTube, that's absolutely superb.
Awesome. Okay. Sweet, that's up my street. That sounds cool.
It's brilliant. It's worth watching, actually, which is a shame for Harry Potter, but, you know.
Snape pops Dumbledore, yeah.
And there's no Harry Potter RPG, so for people listening out there, how that didn't get made, I don't know.
Wow, actually, yeah. How is that not a thing yet? You're right. That's I'm quite surprised.
They did a few things, didn't they? I mean, my Harry Potter knowledge isn't the best, but I think there was a miniatures game either in existence or did exist fairly recently. And I know Wizards of the Coast did a collectible card game for Harry Potter. I'm sure there have been multiple board games of various types, but no RPG. Which you think that'd be screaming for an RPG, wouldn't you?
I guess. I mean, I'm not sure on the crowd, the fan base. I'm just thinking now. I know that how many Doctor Who RPGs there are, so there's definitely a crossover in that area.
There's only 3 Doctor Who RPGs.
How many books are there though?
Quite a few in the new one, yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So if there's that many things for something like that, I imagine by extension that there'd be some Harry Potter stuff. But I don't know, man. That's a strange one.
Maybe it's just too expensive. The license is too expensive. Maybe.
If there was a Harry Potter RPG, would you play it?
Do you know what I would? Because I would enjoy messing with people's idea of what it was. I would make it really dark, like darker than He Who Shall Not Be Named, like mega dark, you know.
Proper, I like that a lot.
Yeah, it'd be like, I don't know, mix Harry Potter with like Bowling for Columbine or something like that. That's the direction I think I'd go in. So, you know, I just want to see how fast my players leave the table. I don't know. Maybe I'll do that at a con when things are up and running again.
Yeah, lure them in with the promise of a happy, fun time Harry Potter game, and then throw some Michael Moore at them. See what happens. Yeah.
Totally.
Have you guys seen Elephant by Gus Van Sant? Well, I drew off that.
I actually went to the Tyneside Cinema in Newcastle on its release to watch Elephant.
Wow.
Yeah. Powerful film. Good.
Yeah, powerful. Just like Harry Potter, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So, speaking of films, let's segue now into a film, because instead of talking about Elephant and getting our listeners all depressed, which, by the way, I do recommend you go and watch it. Gus Van Sant's a great filmmaker, but that's besides the point. I recently went to the cinema and had a screen where no one else was sitting in it, which was lovely.
Wow.
To watch the new Ben Wheatley film, In the Earth. And it was really good. And I wanted to mention it to you, mate, because I recommend it.
I haven't seen it and I don't know what it's about. So give me the rub, give me the lowdown on this. What is it?
Cool. It's Ben Wheatley is a really talented British director who you may know from such films as High Rise. He did Down Terrace. He did the excellent film Kill List. And he also did A Field in England, which is still my favourite Ben Wheatley film. If you've not seen A Field in England, I highly recommend you go and check it out. This film, In the Earth, is kind of in the same vein as that. It's I suppose I should call it a psychedelic folk horror. I suppose would be one way to describe it. It's a kind of descent into pagan terror. It's kind of character driven. I'll tell you what, there's not a bad performance in this film. It's a small cast, but every actor really pulls out the bag and really kind of makes it what it is, because it's a very, very much a character driven piece.
Right.
Reece Shearsmith is excellent in it. He puts in a really good performance. It's kind of worth going to see just to see him in it. In a way, he's a really great kind of unconventional character. I don't want to include any spoilers to see because it's in the cinemas at the moment, so I want to I will pass over this film briefly without diving into it too much because I'll recommend you go and see it. But Reece Shearsmith's character is a very unconventional type, and I think he plays it very well, and has this kind of mania to him that is kind of simmering under the surface.
I really rate him, and I think it would have been so easy for him to fall into like some sort of typecasting, post League of Gentlemen, and I'm so glad that he hasn't.
Yeah, I mean, he continues to defy boundaries,
Yeah,
and he's great in this as well. So I know what you mean. He definitely could have become that kind of, I don't know, for example, the type of British actor who would appear on Harry Potter, for example. But yeah, he's continues to break the mold and do his own thing, and he's really good in it. The protagonist, whose name escapes me, I recognise him from some previous films, and there's also the kind of supporting role, or the secondary protagonist, is one of the girls from Midsummer, the British girl from Midsummer, who her boyfriend leaves her, and she's there with the backpack, and she's like, "Where did Simon go?" If you know who I'm talking about, she's in this film as well. So it's a good little cast. It's this strange kind of slow descent with a lot of the kind of imagery and folklore and symbolism that is becoming very popular at the moment. It's really nice to see this big, I don't want to say resurgence, but maybe it's an insurgence, but a big rise in interest, definitely across Britain, and probably in places in America. Overseas, I don't know, guys, get in the Discord and let us know, but certainly in Britain at the moment, people far and wide from all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of interests are taking a decided kind of interest in our folk history and our folk horror and local folklore. I'm thinking about things like Weird Walk or Wolverstane or Hellebore.
Yeah.
These things are massively popular, and the spillover into film is something that I'd expected, but I'm really glad that Ben Wheatley's kind of spearheading this as well. There's a big interest among Brits for this. There's a big appetite among Brits for this kind of thing.
I've got two questions. Well, they're kind of one question. Would the plot of this movie make a good RPG scenario? And if so, what system would you use to run it?
Great, love that. And I'm gonna answer this without any spoilers as well, just because I like a challenge.
Yeah.
Yes, it would. It would make a good RPG. I think it would be fairly small, so it wouldn't be a campaign. You could maybe do this film as an RPG in a single session, maybe 3 or 4 hour.
Maybe like a good convention game.
Yeah, probably a good convention game, I would say. It's tricky because without talking about the ending, it's tricky to kind of say how you'd wrap it up. So I'd probably, whatever RPG you could get out of with this game, I think you would end up making your own ending,
right? Yeah.
Forging your own ending from it. Just because I'm thinking back to the ending of In the Earth now, and I'm gonna have an epileptic fit. But yeah, there's definitely enough in there for you to have a big, in-depth, hopefully character-driven horror adventure in a woodland.
Nice.
That is not what it seems, and just the way the characters interact with the woodland is just really. It's a great mix of kind of old and new. And it's almost how modern people living in a woodland, how they would do it. There's no frills. It's really kind of grounded and really, really great. So with that in mind, in terms of the setting, in terms of the game engine, in terms of what system I'd use to run it with. I mean, is Troika an easy answer? Is that a cop out if I say Troika?
I mean, it doesn't scream horror to me, but Yeah,
I mean, I think just because it's got that kind of bucolic Britishness about it, which I think suits most of Ben Wheatley's films. But man, it's a strange type of horror. You see, it's not particularly cosmic in scale. So we mentioned Call of Cthulhu earlier. I don't know if that would particularly match well. It's just a small scale, little kind of mental story.
Yeah, maybe Troika would work then.
Yeah, anything that's cranial, anything that has that kind of introspective horror to it. I don't know if any systems are screaming at you right now from what I'm saying, but nothing really stands out to me as a system I could use to run something like that. I'm not really sure. I don't know enough horror games then maybe.
Mothership?
Mothership, maybe. Yeah, maybe. Mothership has a lot of planetary adventures, doesn't it? Going down onto a planet.
Yeah, because you can kind of modify it to whatever. Yeah, so just take the Mothership engine. So
that might not be a bad shout. Something like that, though. You're on the right lines there. Cause small scale, little group of players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Something like that. But I do recommend In the Earth, and Ben Wheatley's filmography in general is worth a dive into. If you're into just mad, weird, cool, independent British films, Kill List is one of my favourites, and A Field in England is actually mentioned as an inspiration in the Lamentations of the Flame Princess book, England Upturned.
No, oh yeah, of course, yeah, which kind of the default English Civil War setting for Lamentations.
A Field in England is a Civil War, English Civil War film.
Nice.
To a greater or lesser degree, depending on your opinion of it after you've seen it, but it's in essence it's set during the Civil War. But
so in the Earth is one to watch, is what you're saying.
It's one to watch, and if you can, go and see it in the cinema. Not only to support the filmmakers, but also because at the moment no one else is going to the cinema, and it's a great experience. We had sat right in the middle of the whole screen, feet on the chairs, mask off. We get to laugh, and we were joking around because there's no one else in there, so you can talk things through while they're happening. It was great. The only thing you can't do is pause it, but otherwise, yeah, it was a really lovely experience.
Almost as good at being at home. Almost as good.
Less safe and more expensive, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, as we're approaching near towards the end of the episode, I remember you saying you had an announcement, so I think this might be time for the announcement.
Okay. I think it is, you're right, and coming off the back of British creators as well, thank you for that. I would like to let our listeners know, if you have at all been interested in the things that we talk about, if you're interested in our inspiration, if you're interested in the games that we discuss and the things that we run and our tastes and things, if you have any interest at all in my style of gaming specifically, I'm about to release my first book, so you can find that on our BigCartel shop. I'm going to be putting it up there for release. The book is called Care Mundus, The Lost Realm. Maybe you've heard of it before. It's been around a little bit. It's been fermenting in sugar and barley for several years, to the point where it's now kind of quite high in alcoholic content, and it's ready for general consumption. So if you like Bronze Age settings, if you have any interest at all in Celtic fantasy, if you are interested in low fantasy worlds and twisting tropes on their head, if you're interested in books that have a lot of utility in them, like we've been discussing earlier on, this will be up your street. It's designed from the ground up to be a toolkit for the GM, for the gaming table. So I've designed this book from the very beginning to have use at the gaming table, like we were discussing earlier, something that you'll be able to actually put your hands on and get things from. So I'm really excited to be able to be bringing this book out now, and to be able to be hopefully sending it out to people and having you guys flick through it. It can be on your shelf. You can use it for your writing. If you're a player, there's lots of inspiration in there for you as well. If you're a GM who you're in a tight spot, or you're looking for a book to bring along to a game, or if you're running games into the webcam like I am a lot at the moment, it's one to have down in front of you to reference.
Can I maybe twist your arm into saying that you might set up some sessions to run on the Discord?
I think I have no choice but to run Care Mundus. Don't you agree?
I think so. I think I think that would be good. I'm certainly going to play in it. So
Brilliant. I'll be running certainly a few sessions of Care Mundus. I'm hoping to put together some sort of all-stars session with a few choice players.
Ooh,
but I'll
nice.
Open it up on the Discord for wider remit. This is a system agnostic book, so we can try it with different systems as well, which is another thing that I like about it. So for example, you could use some of the systems we've been talking about earlier, like Troika or Lamentations or Dungeons and Dragons. So it's kind of designed to be quite versatile. So the final form it will take for each of those games I'll run on Discord may be different. Maybe I'll use a different system each time. There's a lot of ways to approach it, but I certainly will be opening up some invites to come and play in a game of Care Mundus with me. I'm just really excited to kind of bring it out and to have people be able to finally read it and get their hands on it. So
yeah, I mean, obviously, it's your baby for you to talk about, but I think I would be remiss of me not to say that, you know, I've personally seen the amount of time and work that you put into it, and seen the product that's come out of the other side, and, you know, I'm really excited for you to have this out, and, you know, I'll be really excited to, you know, even though I've seen the versions on its path to its finished form, you know, I'll be really excited to get hold of that finished form as well, and to see some games going on through the Discord and stuff. I think it'll bringing it to life. Will, you know, it's clawing its way out of the boggy marshland. Do you know what I mean? So that'd be great.
It is. It was given to the sea, but the sea spat it out, and now it returns as a bad omen to wreak havoc upon your small lands and your little villages.
Is this All-Star game? Is this maybe in the direction of Human Energy Field's first actual play? Is that? I don't know.
Very well, maybe, man. Yeah, it could very possibly be Human Energy Field's first actual play.
Let's think about that. Yeah, let's think about maybe a bonus episode of an actual play came on us. Let's put that as an option. Stick a pin in that.
Listeners, if you're lucky, that'll be reaching your ear holes at some point in the future.
Yeah, sweet.
Brilliant. So yeah, I mean, that'll, by the time this episode airs, that should hopefully be on sale or coming up to being on sale. So if you're listening to this and you're at all interested in a book that I've written, check out the Human Energy Field BigCartel. It should be on sale there. The product page should be there visible, or DM me on Instagram at Gamma Valley, and we can arrange to sell you a copy there. Hopefully it will be in enough places for you to find it. There's also going to be a free adventure module PDF that I'm going to put on drive-through. So if you're not too sure about shelling out for the book, you can open up this PDF that I've created as well, which I've called Votive Offerings, which are of course my votive offerings to you guys, the listeners, and you can decide if it's something that you like the tone of and the setting of, and if you want to then go and shell out for the book after reading the little free PDF, then that's something you can go and do as well. So there'll be a few things for you to peruse and explore, and I'm absolutely certain we'll mention it on future episodes as well, but that's just to get the ball rolling. I just thought I'd let everyone know. So thank you for sticking around for this amount of time to hear that announcement. I'm very excited to see what comes next.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. You know, this is kind of just the first initial announcement. I'm sure we're going to come back and talk about various parts of the book, because it is a book that has very different offerings inside of it, and, you know, as you've said, we kind of synergistically have talked about utility at the gaming table, and it certainly has that in buckets. So we'll be talking about maybe some of the best ways to use the contents of this book on your gaming table, whatever game it is that you are running. I think there's definitely going to be some interesting chats there to be had about it. So yeah, this isn't the last you're going to hear about it.
Brilliant, sounds good. I think we did an episode about practical combat advice, and we got a lot of good feedback from people who appreciated the actual pragmatic side to the hobby, and, you know, listening from people who can give advice and guidance on stuff. So there'll be more of those episodes, and Ken Mundus will feature in that as well, because that's kind of what it's written for. So if you liked our episode on combat advice, then stick around. There'll be more advice for how to improve your gaming table coming up in future episodes.
And also, we did, as we said at the beginning, we got some more real solid conversation topics from Instagram over the last couple of days. So we are going to return to some of them. You know, we're going to get a deep dive on mechanics and what we think makes good mechanical systems, and how we evaluate mechanical systems. And we're going to go into the concept of how to introduce background lore to your player group without maybe huge info dumps, and the best way to kind of present new worlds and backgrounds to players, and tips and tricks on how to do that for GMs. So we've got some great little suggestions that we're going to, you know, extrapolate into either sections or full episodes. So we've got some good stuff. So thanks for that, guys. I really appreciate everyone who got back to us, and we're really pleased and kind of blessed by the massive reaction we got to that. So thank you.
As always, thank you very much for listening, because without you guys, this would not exist. So your input really does make the show, and I hope that you guys can feel that direct link between your questions and posts on the Instagram and the Discord and the content that we end up putting out. And
I think I really want to say, before we forget, I have thanked them online, but we did an episode of Dice Thrower, which I don't think was out the last time we did an episode, but it's definitely out now. The episode that we're on, Dice Thrower, right?
It is, yeah. It's come out, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks to Will for having us on Dice Thrower. So go and check his podcast out to listen to us talk about stuff and things in the format that he's been doing that podcast. So thanks very much for having us on. We had a great blast with that. So thanks, Will.
Yeah, it was really good, and it features a lot of people who we consider either friends or inspirations or both. So it's just a kind of wider taste of some of the things that have gone into the creation of Hef. I think he had our friends from the Dungeon Punks on. I know he's also got some guests in the future who I won't spoil, but some of our friends are going on there in the future as well. So it's a definite touchstone. And people ask about us personally. So if there's anything that we don't cover here that you're interested in, I assure you won't be covered there either. But
so true.
It's a different style. And Will's great, and he runs a good show over there. So do go and check out Dice Thrower, definitely.
Yeah, it was nice to go and do something different, and I just wanted to publicly thank him for his time for that. So it was nice to be invited.
As always, guys, thank you for listening very much, and we'll see you again soon. Stay safe.
Stay hydrated.